The morning commute with the car radio on. Across Ukraine today, rush hour to school and to work became for some a scramble to survive. 8:25 a.m. Dnipro City. 8:18, a blast underneath the glass bridge close to Kyiv's Arch of Freedom. Around the same time, the HQ of Ukrainian energy company Kyiv. The whole morning, minute by minute, punctuated like this. The Ukrainians said Russia launched 84 missiles at Ukraine today. They said 43 were intercepted by air defense. If correct, 40 then reached their targets. That would make it one of the most concentrated series of missile strikes on civilians and infrastructure since this war began in February. It's also the first time the capital, Kyiv, has been targeted in this way for months. The only way to really get your head around what happened this morning is to unpack the detail of some of the individual strikes. So, for example, Taras Shevchenko Boulevard, Kyiv, the cultural and educational heart of the capital. A young woman on the boulevard, perhaps on her way to lectures at university close by, streams the terror. Missiles hit the street itself, the playground on the corner. These are the details we know, and these are the ones we don't yet. Who was this person who died this morning in the blast? Or where was this person going on the boulevard who died in the driver's seat of their car? One of 11 people reported dead and 89 wounded as a result of the attacks. This morning, President Zelenskyy addressed people from out on the street of a city under fire, said that Russian, quote, terrorists had had two targets today, the country's energy infrastructure and the people themselves. Vladimir Putin said today that the strikes were retaliation for Saturday's attack on the Kerch Bridge, which connects mainland Russia with Crimea. The question now, with a reshuffle at the top of the Russian military command in Ukraine, is this a one-off act of revenge or a new approach from Moscow to the war, designed to cripple Ukraine's ability to function as a state? Russian stocks of the types of missiles used today are rapidly depleting. And some of these cruise missiles come with a price tag of the equivalent to £6 million a pop, all of which points to one-off revenge rather than a new direction. A woman broke into song sheltering in the Kyiv metro along with hundreds of others during the strikes this morning. Daria Kalinuk filmed what happened.
I haven't seen a sign of any panic. I've seen calmness, and I've seen stoicism. We had a woman with us with amazing voice, singing absolutely masterfully songs, national Ukrainian songs, and people encouraged her. So that was kind of mood.
Above ground education and cultural institutions were damaged. Down below, though, stoicism that burst into song.
Well, earlier I spoke to Ivana Klimpus, former Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, and I asked her what she thinks Russia is doing.
Russia is just trying to spread terror and fear across Ukraine. And I'm sure that they are trying to reach that level of fear that maybe Ukrainian society would say, oh, we had enough, we just want peace at any cost. But that's not what they are reaching. The resolve of the Ukrainian nation is just getting stronger because we are outraged. We are not satisfied with how this is going, and definitely will push even stronger back on this aggressor and terrorist state of Russian Federation.
Right, but it is Putin and other Russian leaders now who are talking about Ukraine being the terrorists because of the blowing up of the bridge to Crimea. And that language is very distinctive because when they've used that before in Syria and in Chechnya, it has heralded big, sustained Russian bombing campaigns.
Russians have been putting everything upside down from the very start of this war, back from the 2014, actually, and have been calling their own troops on the, for example, Crimean Peninsula or in the east of Ukraine, pro-Russian separatists, and so on, using this terminology that actually is trying to accuse us, Ukrainians, self-attacking ourselves, basically. And that's exactly what Russia is trying to do right now, putting the actual description of their own deeds on Ukrainian side. The thing is that Kerch Bridge is definitely just another legitimate military target. It has been illegally built after the illegal annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation.
I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that the Kerch Bridge is a legitimate military target, but we haven't seen the Ukrainian government say, yes, our military destroyed that bridge. And perhaps it's because the tactic of using a bomb to blow up that bridge, which involved the deaths of civilians, after all, is controversial.
Well, we still do not know how exactly that bridge was blown up. And, right now we are just hearing the Russian version of that. I think that our security services have been clear, saying that we will comment on any of that after the end of this war. So basically, I think that it is important to understand that Russia does not need any provocation to escalate as it escalates today by attacking a lot of different civilian targets across Ukraine in different regions of Ukraine, and specifically also targeting today the electricity grids and electricity power stations in order to ensure that Ukrainian people are experiencing suffering, cold, additional discomfort, and inability to live their lives. Now they are calling us terrorists, while all this 7.5 months they have been using terrorist practices by hitting on kindergartens, on schools, on hospitals, on roads, on infrastructure, civilian infrastructure objects, and killing thousands and thousands of civilians.
Do you think this is the final phase of the war? People have been talking about this war being over within months.
It will depend on our capability to withhold these attacks, and only if we're strong enough, if we are backed by the free nations, then we will be able to finish this war faster. And if there will not be enough of the weaponry, then unfortunately, I believe that this war can drag on.
Ivana Klimpush, thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian.
Well, as his missiles rained down on Ukrainian cities this morning, Vladimir Putin chaired a meeting of his Security Council. By then, the Russian president's reaction to the attack on the Kerch Bridge was all too clear. Saturday's blast, he said, was an act of terrorism, an accusation that he's used to justify these latest strikes. But does this signal a change in how the Kremlin will approach the war? Here's our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson.
Russia's response as the Black Sea Fleet opens up to blast Ukraine by east, south and west. Russia's military spokesman Igor Konashenkov insisting all targets had been hit, military and energy infrastructure. In Moscow, the language of the dictator changes. Now the word is terrorism. His description of the attack on the Crimean bridge.
If the attempts to carry out terrorist attacks on our territory continue, Russia's response will be tough and proportionate to the level of threats posed to the Russian Federation. No one should have any doubts about this.
The message: the Ukrainian government is the same as ISIS or Al-Qaeda.
The Kyiv regime, by its actions, has actually put itself on the same level with international terrorist formations, the most odious of groups.
We've heard this terrorism rhetoric before from him. In past wars in Syria and Chechnya, Putin again called Russian enemies terrorists. Central to both those wars, one, Sergei Surovikin, was notorious, now promoted to lead Moscow's Operation Retaliation. Twice jailed, twice released for allegedly firing on Russian protesters and illegally trading weapons.
He has a reputation as being completely ruthless, brutal butcher who will follow any order that he is given. In that sense, he's quite reliable. For Putin, he is not somebody who's going to turn back and saying, no, I'm not going to carry out this order.
And Russians who do speak out? Well, today, the opposition politician Vladimir Kara-Murza, seen here in Freer Times, received a human rights prize. But today, he was also in a Moscow court on treason charges after accusing Russian forces of killing civilians in Ukraine. Jailed again, at least until December. Applauded by supporters as they took him down. In neighbouring Belarus, Moscow's staunch supporter Alexander Lukashenko accused NATO of preparing a nuclear strike on his country. He today announced a joint military task force with Russia just outside Ukraine and had this for the Ukrainian government.
Tell the President of Ukraine and the other lunatics, if any of them are still there, that the Crimean Bridge will seem to them like a walk in the park if they ever touch a single metre of our territory with their dirty hands.
Failing on the ground, Russia's reached for the missile silos. The tactic is clear and brutal. But is it sustainable? Does Moscow have the arsenal to keep this up indefinitely?
There is a limited capacity, presumably, of the high precision weapons, but then these attacks are not very precise, and in fact their purpose is to terrorize, to strike terror in the populations.
So expect more destruction of civilian areas, missile bombardments and an attempt to attack energy supplies to plunge Ukraine into the cold and dark of oncoming winter. And manpower? Moscow claims to have 25 million military reservists.
Well, joining us now from Moscow is Andrei Kortunov, Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council, a think tank set up by Russian presidential decree, which has the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on its board. Mr. Kortunov, from a Russian point of view, what was the point today of these missile strikes on many Ukrainian cities, which took out domestic energy supplies, a children's playground, residential areas? What have you achieved?
Well, I think that President Putin believed that there were some implicit rules of the engagement. And apparently some of the recent actions by the Ukrainian side were considered as a breach of these rules of engagement. That includes, for instance, the incident with the Crimean Bridge, but the earlier murder of Daria Dugina, and attacks on neighboring Russian regions. I think that the perception is that the Ukrainian side goes too far and escalates, and it should get a lesson, if you wish. And I think this is something which caused the current decisions made by the president and executed by the Russian army. The question, however, whether indeed it is just a demonstration or a new stage in the military operation.
Indeed.
We can only hope that it is only a demonstration.
Right, but I mean, from any objective perspective, if you look at the number of civilians killed and civilian targets attacked by Russia since the invasion earlier this year, it sounds absurd for you to talk about there being rules of war. There are no rules of war in which children are killed and civilians are destroyed and homes are destroyed. I mean, Russia is accused of widespread war crimes. For it to be talking about terrorism is absurd.
I don't want to sound cynical. Of course, I understand that any war is a pretty horrible experience, and that this war is no exception. But nevertheless, let me say that there was some kind of moderation demonstrated by both sides in course of this conflict. And as far as Russia is concerned, I think that many experts were surprised by Russia not trying to take out some of the major infrastructure in terms of transportation, railroads, bridges, highways, you name it. And it is still not clear what the reasons for these relative moderations could be considered. But definitely that might change, and definitely Russia can escalate. I think that
so it has more missiles.
There's no doubt about that.
I mean, that's the question. Yeah. Can Russia carry on at this rate? Does it have enough cruise missiles to keep throwing over 80 a day when half of them get shot down?
Well, I think that Russia might run out of the most precise, the most modern weapons that it has, but definitely Russia has plenty of ammunition, and the war of attrition can go for a long time. Definitely, if Russia targets the energy infrastructure, that would imply very serious damage on Ukraine. Again, we can only wonder whether the Russian leadership will authorize such strikes or not.
Yes, I mean, because this new general who's in charge, of course, was also in charge of Syria, where we saw Russian forces bombing, well, just flattening whole civilian areas, the use of barrel bombs, literally just shoving out barrels of explosive into Syrian streets. I mean, it would be much harder to do that in Ukraine, wouldn't it? Because the Ukrainians have got a lot of new weapons. And only now, this evening, Germany is saying it's going to send new missile defenses to Ukraine.
Well, I think that in Ukraine, indeed, we are facing a prospect of an urban war. And an urban war has usually it has a lot of collateral damage on both sides. I think that when either side advances and if it tries to capture a large city, the damage to the civilian population will be extremely high. But it works both ways. I think that if Ukrainians are trying to regain control over Ukraine or Donetsk and Lugansk, the civilian casualties will be also quite significant. It works. It works. Unfortunately, this is the situation that we face today.
I mean, from a Western perspective, I mean, it looks like, Ukraine is pushing Russian forces out of parts of the east, that President Putin seems more and more desperate and is hitting civilian targets. Feels like Russia is losing. How does it feel from a Russian perspective? Do you think you're winning?
Well, it's hard to tell right now. I would definitely not say that Russia is winning right now. But this partial mobilization might be a game changer. It might not. We don't know. We don't know how efficient this mobilization is likely to be. But definitely, in terms of numbers, the equation might change. And this new commander is supposed to be a very professional and very competent guy. Whether he makes a difference, we do not know. I think next couple of weeks will demonstrate us whether it really matters or not.
Andrei Korsunov, thank you very much for joining us.